Hello, and welcome everybody to the National Trends in Disability Employment,
or nTIDE,
Lunch and Learn series.
Just a few housekeeping items before we begin.
This webinar is being recorded.
We will post an archive of each webinar each month on our website at www.researchondisability.org/nTIDE.
This site will also provide copies of the presentations, the speakers' bios, full transcripts, and other valuable resources.
As an attendee of this webinar, you are a viewer.
To ask questions of the speakers, click on the Q&A box on your webinar screen and type your questions into the box.
Speakers will review these questions and provide answers during the last section of the webinar.
Some questions may be answered directly in the Q&A box.
If you have any questions following this recording, please contact us at disability.statistics@unh.edu
or toll free at 866-538-9521 for more information.
Thanks for joining us.
Enjoy today's webinar.
Hi, everybody. This is Andrew Houghtonville from the University of New Hampshire's Institute on Disability. Welcome to the September nTIDE. The nTIDE Lunch and Learn happens every noon on the first Friday of the month, coinciding with the release of the jobs report by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Lunch and Learn is a joint collaboration with the UNH Institute on Disability, the Kessler Foundation, and the Association of Centers on Disability. nTIDE is also part of the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center on Employment Policy and Measurement, funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, NIDLR. So they're the funders of this effort. John O'Neill, the first part, will be talking about the nTIDE report results. John O'Neill is out today, so I'm going to be doing both parts. Then we'll follow that by nTIDE News from Denise Rizal from AUCD. And then we have a guest speaker, Robin from the Kaiser Family Foundation. And then we'll follow it up with Q&A, as we mentioned before. So the first part, the nTIDE results. So the nTIDE is a monthly report. We do a press release and we do an infographic about the latest statistics. It coincides with the release of the job report, so you probably heard about how the economy is doing. We're still at full employment. The nTIDE report itself is a joint effort of Kessler Foundation and UNH. The source of information for today's statistics and also for the jobs report itself is the Bureau of Labor Statistics current population survey. It's the source of the official unemployment rate. We're going to look at civilians ages 16 to 64. They first started collecting disability-related statistics in September 2008 and onward. We're not yet seasonally adjusting, which is why we compare, we're going to compare August of 2018 to August of 2017. So we always compare it to the prior year, so that takes out some of its seasonal effects. So the numbers, let's see. So the numbers are good overall. We see a slight rise in the employment rate of people with disabilities, up from 29.5% in August of 2017 to 3.2%. So that's about a 0.7 percentage points and 2.5% increase. The employment of people without disabilities also went up, although more slightly, only up 0.2 of a percentage point. That's only up 0.3%. Labor force participation rate is also something we like to look at. That's the percentage of people who are not only working, but also it adds in people who are actively looking for work in the last month. This number increased for people with disabilities from 32.5 to 33%. That's up about 0.5 percentage point. And for people without disabilities, it also it actually went down a little bit. 0.3 of a percentage point. And so, you know, this is kind of interesting that it goes down slightly for people without disabilities, but up slightly for people with disabilities. And so that's actually a nice sign, although these numbers are quite, these changes are quite small. So it's not indicative of a huge shift in the economy or the labor market. We like to look at every month the employment to population ratio trend, and what you can see is the data was first started to collect. These are the first years that first time they officially published them. That was September 2008, and you can see the kind of the Great Recession. That's kind of towards the height of the Great Recession, and you see the decline. But you also see, so for people with disabilities, you see this steady march upwards. After say 2000, after the turn from 2009 to 2010, you see an increase. For people with disabilities, that increase really didn't start until, say, I would actually say around 2005, 2006, and over the last 2 years and into 2008, we've actually seen this rise in employment. So that's employment to population ratio is the percentage of people who are working, and so this continues to be a very good sign for the economy and for people with disabilities. The last 2 months, we really kind of saw some softening for people with disabilities when you compare it to the same time last year. But this continues, this kind of gives us a little hope that the last 2 months were only a little bit of an aberration. And so we're kind of looking forward to see if this continues to rise. The main hypothesis that's going on is that as the economy is in full employment, people with disabilities firms are looking for employees, and so may reach out to people with disabilities or organizations that represent people with disabilities or support people with disabilities. And also, as jobs open up nearby your home, the barriers of travel and barriers related to the types of jobs that are available might be going down. And so people with disabilities may be more likely to venture into the labor market, given that those barriers may not be there. Also, we don't have the ability to do wages in the data that is used here, but there is evidence. I just heard from a grad student that wages went up around 2.4% in the overall economy compared to last year, and that would be a really great sign. If we're he's my research assistant, and we're going to try to see if there's a way to grab wages out of any of the available data, but may take a while before we're able to do that, if we indeed are. So with that, I'm going to these are the results. We're going to answer questions. Again, use the Q&A box if you have any specific questions. I may be able to answer them in the Q&A box itself, but I will answer them. If I don't, I'll answer them at the end of the session. I see there's one question. I'll try to answer that one via text. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Denise, and it's all yours.
Terrific. Let's do this. Go back to the poll. Let's talk about the poll for a second. One of the things that we are doing is trying to see what it is you're liking best, what topics you'd like us to do next. So we are doing a poll. Please go ahead and take the poll. If you joined it on Facebook Live, you can say something in the chat icon if you want. Here's a whole list of possible topics. If you have something else you'd like to hear from us, we're beginning to plan for next year's sessions and nTIDEs. So please let us know what you'd like to hear about. We want to make sure we hit what you want to know. And then next slide, Andrew. The other thing is we're asking about, and you can do this by clicking the poll icon if you're on. If you're not on Facebook Live. If you're on Facebook Live, you can put in the chat. So which part of the nTIDE do you like the most or find the most interesting? The part that is...
My part.
Of course, Andrew, I knew you'd say that. Andrew's
numbers
part,
are
like what he just did.
You can put your comments in the Q&A too, or anywhere really.
Exactly. It's fine. Wherever you want to get it to us, that would be great. So there's the numbers part, which is what Andrew just did. There's the news from the field, which is what I'm about to do. Guest panelists is today, that would be Robin, the kind of 15-minute presentation by someone getting a little bit more in depth into an issue. And then the interviewees. We do not actually have an interviewee today, but that's the interview that I generally do with a person with a disability who is working. And then the question and answer period, that's pretty self-explanatory. So if we would really love to have you get back to us, let us know what it is you find most interesting and what you would like to hear from us as we move forward. Okay, next slide, Andrew. Okay, and next slide. So let's talk, I think the next one, there it is, the federal policy update. So let's just talk about a couple of things. I always like to give you a few things that are going on in Washington. The appropriations, the Senate, I think I told you last month the Senate was about to pass. They did. They passed the appropriations for defense and for labor, health, and human services. Most of the money that folks on this call care about is in the labor HHS bill. So it was passed. It's very straightforward. It's what we expected to see. It does not put in the cuts that the administration was recommending. It rather goes with the things we've been seeing from the Senate for quite some time. It went with the committee bill, basically, and I've talked to you about that before. Pretty much the disability programs have been refunded across the board, with the exception of, I think, the supported employment program under the VR programs. That one took a hit. Everything else has been either level funded or increased, which is kind of surprising, frankly, not what we necessarily expected. I wanted to put the heads up bill on here because somebody asked me about it last month, and I said I would do some checking and get back to you. So it's HR 6611. It's co-sponsored by Representatives Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, who's a Democrat, and Greg Harper from Mississippi, who is a Republican. And basically, it's a bill that would amend the Public Health Service Act to recognize that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are a medically underserved population. That would significantly expand and improve services at health centers for people with DD, and that's something we've been asking for a long time. It's not going anywhere at the moment, and quite frankly, I'm not sure it will go anywhere this year, given that it's September. But what they're doing right now is looking for co-sponsors. So if this is something that you're really interested in, I would reach out to your congressperson and tell them that you're interested and you'd like to see them co-sponsor it. Because that way, if they have a lot of co-sponsors that come on before the end of this year, when it comes up again next year, which I'm sure it will, they already start ahead. So that's, for whoever asked that question last month and I couldn't answer you, there's the answer. Next, I want to let you know that money follows the person, so the Empower Care Act, and there's the, it's S2227 or HR 5306, had a hearing yesterday, which went really well attended, lots of people talking about money follows the person. There is still hope that that's something that might be passed in a lame duck session or added on to another piece of legislation. It's bipartisan. People think we should continue the Money Follows program to help people get out of institutions and be employed and work and live in the community. We'll see if it actually happens. But again, that's another one where they're looking for co-sponsors. So if you want to do something, that would be what you could do, is contact your senator or representative to say that you would like to see them co-sponsor this. But they did have a hearing yesterday, and it was well attended. It went really well. I'm going to skip the Supreme Court for just 1 minute and come back to it. The other one I added on here, because I don't know that I've talked about this in recent days. And again, they're looking for co-sponsors. As I've said before, most things are not moving. It's September. Congress has enough to do before now and when they go home to run for re-election, including the Kavanaugh hearings and other things. So it's not like they're going to be passing some of these bills, but to the extent we can keep them on the radar for next year, it's important. The Disability and Integration Act, and there's HR 2472 and S910. It's more or less what used to be MICASA, if you know MICASA. It requires the government and insurers to cover home and community-based services. It's bipartisan. Lots of the community, and frankly, all of the community is behind it. It's another place that it's a bill you should be aware of. Now, I want to come back to the Supreme Court for just a minute. And I want to be real clear. I'm not sure it matters for what I'm about to say, whether you are pro or con Judge Kavanaugh, where you are on the political spectrum. I want you to know that today, right now, as a matter of fact, I had to turn off what I was watching, the live Supreme Court coverage, to come talk to you. Liz Weintraub, who has been a guest on this show, on the nTIDE Lunch and Learn, and who also is the host of Tuesdays with Liz, a weekly Facebook Live broadcast about policy issues for people with intellectual disabilities. Liz herself is a woman with an intellectual disability. Liz just testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on the Judge Kavanaugh nomination. Her testimony, I'm sure, will be all over social media. She was trending on Twitter, which we are really excited about. And I urge you to go look at it. It is an incredibly powerful thing to see a woman with an intellectual disability testifying before the Judiciary Committee on a Supreme Court nomination, which I'm not sure has ever happened before for the disability community, talking about rights of self-determination and nothing about us without us. It was an incredibly strong testimony. I urge everyone to go see it. And that's enough. But it was fabulous. They are still asking questions right now, unless they've adjourned. But I urge you to go see it. It was terrific. Okay, next slide, Andrew. Now, to move on to stuff that's going on in the field. I have shared with you guys before some of the things, the recommendations that are out there for how the American Jobs Center can do better with employing people with disabilities. There are a variety of things that have come out that say, you can do certain things because they are required to do a better job under WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. This is a new piece specifically targeted to neurodiversity. And I like it a lot because it was written, it's published by the Lead Center and ODEP. And it was put out specifically written by Kelly Israel and Samantha Crane from ASAN, the Autism Self-Advocate Network. So this is coming specifically from self-advocates. And it's recommendations on how employers can better serve people with neurodiversity in the workplace. None of these are going to be surprises to the people on the call who have worked with people with neurodiversity. But having said that, having this come out, I think, is a really strong statement. It talks about supports, it talks about customized employment, kind of introduces the concept of customized employment for those employers and AJCs who may not be familiar with them. Recommends hiring and training people with disabilities as employees in the AJCs. Talks about suggestions for non-speaking job seekers. I really like that one too, because we don't talk enough about folks who may not communicate through speech. And there are some recommendations there about typing and folks who type or write or use other types of assisted communication. Talks about adapting intake and training procedures, giving varieties of types of ways to access those, and varieties of ways to access job fairs, apprenticeships, all of that. So I really recommend this one. This is another one, particularly if you're working in the autism world, or if you're working directly with AJCs, this would be a nice one to print out and take in to your AJC, whether you work with folks in the autism community or not, so that they have them, they have it on hand. Okay, next, Andrew. I've got a couple of things here because we're going to get to our speaker today is going to be talking about Medicaid and employment. So I have a couple of things out there that I thought you might want to know, and then she's going to talk about work requirements in Medicaid. But this is another one that I think you might just want to hold on to. It's on the role of Medicaid in supporting employment. It's a basic piece. It's one of those things to stick in your file. If somebody says, I don't understand how Medicaid can support employment. Medicaid is healthcare. I don't understand. This one is just really straightforward. It's a little wonky, but if you're handing it to somebody, I'm not sure it would be the best one for a parent, unless you've got a wonky parent. So that's a wrong thing to say. Lots of parents I know could use this one. I'm going to take back exactly what I just said. It's a good one though. So it's put out by MACPAC, which is the Medicaid and Chip Payment Access Commission. So it's official, it's a government thing. It talks about exactly what I just said, the role of Medicaid in supporting employment. These are existing ways that Medicaid can already support employment without implementing the work requirements as a condition of eligibility. Robin, when she speaks, is going to talk about the work requirements. This is, you can do it without even requiring work as a part of the Medicaid system. So that's important. Next one, Andrew. The next one I've got is also around Medicaid and employment. This one is a new article in the American Journal of Public Health. It's gotten some press, and I know there's some other data coming out around this as well, about Medicaid expansion and employment. So Medicaid expansion as an employment incentive. When Medicaid was expanded under the ACA, and we've talked about this a little bit, that expansion population has some things that are special about it. They don't have to go through a straight disability determination. They don't have to show an inability to work. They don't have the asset test. They can get more income. So if you fall under the expansion population, you just have to meet the income requirement. That's it. So what you're seeing is some increased employment for people with disabilities who are living in Medicaid expansion states. And the quote that I really liked, again, from the paper is, in effect, Medicaid expansion coverage is acting as an employment incentive program for people with disabilities. Nice finding, something we can use. Like I said, I know there's more data coming out on it. I think Mathematica is doing a study around this one as well. We'll bring it to you when you see it. Next one, Andrew. I tend to try to bring you stuff around disability and poverty. This one is out of Cornell on the impact of participation in school to work on post-secondary outcomes for youth with disabilities in low-income families, so youth who are in households receiving welfare. And you know, you can see there are implications and recommendations there for future research, higher rates of employment, lower rates of conviction, lower wages. I'm not sure about that one. Somebody needs to go read and explain to me why that happened. I've told you before, I'm not the research geek in the group. I'm the policy geek. But that one I don't get that one. But that's one of the findings. So I urge folks to go look at this one, figure it out for yourself. As I say, it's out of Cornell, and it's actually out of some of the folks at Cornell who are also working on the Promise grant, and you've heard from Promise folks on this call in the past. So I wanted to raise this one for you. Next slide, Andrew. This one is, there you go, on implementation of self-directed services. This one also ties back into DD services in the states. It was based on interviews with 34 of 42 state DD directors who provide self-direction programs in their DD programs. So for people with ID in their states. And it looks at some of the strengths and challenges and suggestions. Self-determination programs are really widely used, obviously. We do still have some challenges, but the increased opportunity for folks with disabilities, because of the increase in self-determination opportunities, I think is really important. We have some work to do on those. There are some suggestions. And I think, and for states who don't have one, I think this is another really interesting one. And then lastly, Andrew, next slide, there you go. I want to promote this. For anyone who hasn't heard about Intelligent Lives. Intelligent Lives, and you can go to intelligentlives.org. There's a website. There's a link here as well as the website is listed. Intelligent Lives is Dan Habib's newest film. It premiered in Massachusetts not too long ago. Dan is with the University of New Hampshire, so plug for you guys. I've seen it. It's really good. It's going to have its DC premiere the end of the month, September 26th, here in DC. I don't know if people are going to be in DC, but any of you who are local, please come. There's a congressional hearing that day on, as you can see, successes of youth with disabilities transitioning from school to competitive integrated employment. It's co-sponsored by the National Council on Disability and CPSD, co-sponsored also by Senator Hassan from New Hampshire, Casey from Pennsylvania, Representative Moulton from Massachusetts, Langevin from Rhode Island, Representative Harper. There's a whole panel of folks both parents and individuals with disabilities in competitive integrated employment. Dan is on the panel as well. And I hope you can watch on C-SPAN or something like that, or it'll be up on C-SPAN later. I would hope, because it is a congressional briefing. You should be able to find it, if not live, then later. And then some state folks from Delaware and Wisconsin about how they are working on competitive integrated employment. And then the DC reception and launch premiere of the film itself is going to be at the National Press Club later, sponsored by the Taysha Center at Syracuse. And they're going to have not just some of the students who are in the film, but also some of the current students at Inclusive U are going to be here. And they're also going to be doing Hill visits that day. So we're really excited to host them as well. I urge you to go. I urge you to go up on the Intelligent Lives site. It's a Intelligent Lives, I say that earlier and I should have, is a film that explores kind of how the segregation of people with intellectual disabilities became the norm on intelligence tests and those kinds of things, why it's being dismantled, and then how some people with IDD are basically blazing a new path. And that's where some of the folks from the film, Micah Feldblum is one, and he's going to be on, he's going to be here as well speaking about it. So if you're going to be in DC, come. If not, you can watch it on C-SPAN. Go to the website, look it up. It's a really cool film. And if you don't know Dan, you should go look at some of the other things he's done. You might know him from Including Samuel. That was a really popular documentary he did on including his son Samuel in education and employment. So really good, and I'm thrilled to give a plug to them. I think that's the end of mine, Andrew. Right? Let's flip that one. And I get to, save the date. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, another important one. Save the date. This is for the State of the Science meeting on February 12th, and the annual Disability Statistics Compendium on the 13th here in DC at the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And if Andrew wants to say more about that, he can.
It's awesome. That's all I'll say.
It is awesome. And I've been, and it's a really good turnout and a really good conversation about the state of the science on disability statistics. And it's what I really like about it. Again, I'm the policy geek. What I really like about it is the way that it mixes policy, practice, and statistics. We all need to be talking together about all of that. So fabulous. Okay, let me introduce our speaker. Go ahead to the next slide, Andrew. Our speaker today is Robin Rudowitz. I am thrilled to have Robin here. She is the Associate Director of the Program on Medicaid and the Uninsured at Kaiser, the Kaiser Family Foundation. She works on Medicaid financing issues, Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, and you'll hear more about all of that in a minute. Prior to Kaiser, Robin was the Senior Manager at the Lewin Group, a health policy and consulting firm. She's worked on budget and health policy issues in a variety of different federal agencies as well, everything from CMS and the Office of Legislation. She was the Chief Financial Officer for the District of Columbia, the Congressional Budget Office, and the Ways and Means for the New York State Assembly. So she's been state, federal, policy, inside, outside, all kinds of things on Medicaid finance. And I'm thrilled that she is here to talk about the new work requirements, Medicaid and work. So Robin, I'm going to toss it to you.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. And of course, I'm filling in, as the slide says, for my colleague, Mary Beth Musimichi, who is not feeling well today. So I will do my best, but we both focus on Medicaid waivers a lot. And certainly the focus on Medicaid and work requirements has come up a lot lately. Many states are pursuing these waivers with the administration, and I will talk about what we have in terms of what's going on across the states, and what we have in terms of publications and data. So on the first slide is just a little bit of an overview. Next slide. Of what these Section 1115 waivers are. So Under the Medicaid law, states cannot impose work requirements, and that was just discussed before as a condition of eligibility. So states are seeking these Medicaid work requirements as through these waivers. So under Section 1115 of the Social Security Act, the Secretary can waive compliance with certain provisions of the Medicaid law if the states are trying to do something experimental or they're implementing a demonstration project that importantly are likely to assist in promoting the objectives of the Medicaid program. Not by statute, but over long-standing policy, these 1115 waivers are supposed to be budget neutral to the federal government, so they can't cost the federal government any more than they would have without the waiver. And under rules put in place under the ACA, there are new transparency rules, so waivers are subject to state and federal comment periods. Waivers have been around and used for a long time. Each administration really has some discretion over waivers to approve and what waivers they want to encourage in terms of policy direction, but that discretion is not unlimited. The Trump administration issued new waiver guidance back in November in terms of criteria of what types of waivers would be approved. Importantly, in that list of criteria, there was no longer a criteria that included increased coverage. And then in January of 2018, the administration issued new guidance that really gave the rationale for moving ahead with work or community engagement requirements. And immediately following the issuance of that waiver, they approved a work requirement as well as a number of other provisions in Kentucky. In June of this year, the DC Federal District Court invalidated the Kentucky waiver, importantly citing that it did not consider the impact on providing coverage. So that was invalidated, and the state was told they could not go ahead with implementing that waiver. So there's a lot going on in terms of both the policy direction and what's happening at the state level. So next slide shows really the breadth of what's happening in terms of these 1115 demonstration waivers. There is a lot of activity. We're tracking these on this, we call it our waiver tracker. So we're tracking what waivers are pending and approved across the states. You can see that across 37 states, there are 45 approved waivers, and across 23 states, there are 24 pending waivers. We're tracking them in these various areas, so work being one of them, but I'll also point out that, you probably know that states are also interested in pursuing a waiver, and there's a lot of waiver activity around behavioral health issues as well. But that's for a different discussion on a different day. So on the next slide, it breaks out the work, next slide, yeah, shows where these work requirements are approved and pending. So right now, there are approved work requirement waivers in Arkansas, Indiana, and New Hampshire. Arkansas was the first state to actually implement the work requirement, and they began phasing in those requirements starting June 1st, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the findings of what's happening in Arkansas in a little bit. There are a number of states, so 8 states have waivers pending at CMS, so they've submitted an application. Of course, Kentucky we have as that one was approved by CMS, but then subsequently invalidated by the court. I would note that this map and what our waiver tracker shows is what's happening in terms of submission to CMS. There are a number of other states that are looking at this at the state level, maybe developing waivers, so I think the activity is more widespread. But those waivers just have not been formally, submitted to CMS. So, and also these waivers and the requests are looking both across expansion and non-expansion populations. So in some states like Mississippi, South Dakota, Kansas, the income eligibility for Medicaid is very low. So you're talking about very low income individuals who are eligible for Medicaid subject to the work requirement. Next slide. So by design, what our data show are that the large majority of Medicaid adults, and this is looking at adults who are not qualifying for Medicaid on the basis of disability, so non-SSI, non-dual eligible Medicaid adults, about 6 in 10 are already working. And then when you look at the data among those who are not working, the largest share of those who are not working cite as illness or disability for the main reason of why they might not be working. We know from other data that many individuals who are not working have a variety of physical limitations. They'll cite pain, difficulty bending, pushing or pulling, or sitting or standing as some of the physical limitations, and these might be limitations to getting a job, as well as other mental limitations that may make it difficult for them to work. When states are setting these up, they say, oh, well, many are already working, or they would just be exempt, so they wouldn't be subject to the work requirement. But, when we look at this pie, so there's only this very small slice, that's 6%, who might be subject to the work requirement. But we'll come back to this later, too, that these requirements affect all adults who might be subject or in the group potentially subject to them, because individuals who are working or who may be exempt would still need to potentially report their work status or to navigate an exemption process, which could present administrative difficulties, which could also lead to loss in coverage. We know, next slide, from some other data, looking more broadly at Medicaid adults, that about 30% of Medicaid adults have a disability, and the large majority, so nearly 6 in 10 of those who have a disability do not have SSI. So again, if individuals with SSI are automatically exempt, that still leaves a lot of individuals who may have a disability who could be subject to these new requirements. Next slide. So we've done a lot of work of trying to look at data around this intersection of Medicaid and work. We know that the occupations with the largest number of workers who are covered by Medicaid, they're working in very low-paying jobs that often do not have benefits. So cashiers, home health aides, servers in restaurants. So these are jobs that are also sometimes physically demanding, so would be difficult for individuals with physical limitations to even obtain some of these jobs. We also know, next slide, that many individuals on Medicaid, working or non-working, which is true because they are low income, but they do face a lot of financial insecurity. So about half say that they're worried about paying their bills. Many are also worried about, having stable housing, so there's a lot of financial insecurity among those who are working and non-working. And next slide. We also looked at computer, internet, and email usage, and a large share of adults covered by the Medicaid program do not use a computer, and this has implications for both finding a job, but also have implications for doing some of the reporting, like these requirements for creating an email account and logging on to log hours, like what the requirements are in Arkansas. Next slide. We also note that under the ACA, there was a move to, prior to the ACA, there was a lot of eligibility was complicated. So individuals needed often to apply in person, have a lot of paperwork, and it took a long time. I think in addition to expanding eligibility under the ACA, there was also major streamlining, simplification, and coordination as part of the ACA requirements that had to take place in all states, even states that didn't adopt the expansion, to simplify their systems and reduce the amount of paperwork for individuals applying for coverage. And some of these waivers, and waiver provisions, the work requirements among them, would lead to more documentation and more frequent reporting, which again we know has implications for loss of coverage. Next slide. So a lot of that information played into another analysis that we did when we looked at various scenarios projecting coverage loss for individuals who are subject to the work requirement. And under all of the scenarios that we looked at, our analysis showed that more adults would lose coverage because of red tape or problems meeting administrative requirements, or like reporting, than those who would lose eligibility for not meeting or not complying with a new work requirement. And if you think about that pie, that's because there's so many more people in those groups. And according to the, lots of research that we looked at, again, when you look at things like redeterminations and new, more frequent redeterminations and imposition of paperwork and navigating processes, that usually does result in some type of coverage loss. So this is not projections of, exactly what would happen, because the requirements are different, but a range of scenarios show that is a potential effect related to these administrative complications. And we are seeing some of this, next slide, play out in Arkansas. So again, Arkansas was the first state to begin implementation of a work requirement. They're phasing it in, starting in June was the first cohort of, or first group to be subject. And under the work requirement in Arkansas, individuals who fail to comply with the requirements as well as the reporting for 3 months lose coverage. And September marked the 3rd month, and we know from additional reporting that about 4,500 enrollees have lost coverage, and they cannot reapply for coverage and gain coverage back until January. We're doing some more in-depth analysis of what's happening there, but anecdotally, and what was reported in the papers is that despite efforts by the state to reach out and plans to try to reach people to let them know about not only the new requirements, but the obligations to set up these accounts and do the reporting, it's hard to reach people, and many are not aware of the new requirements. So among those individuals, many may still be eligible for coverage, but might not have reported that they were working or that they might have an exemption. So I think as these states continue to show interest and as the administration continues to promote these work requirements and states are interested, there are a few things that and key questions that people with disabilities there are these key questions that you should be aware of. I guess one of them is there's general exemptions for the medically frail. So there are lots of questions about how medical frailty will be determined. I think, states have some flexibility on that definition. And not only the definition, but I think there are other things about, even once you have a definition, how is that communicated, how easy it is to report, how often individuals need to report, what type of verification they might need, do you need something from a doctor, et cetera. in terms of, being exempt on the basis of medical frailty. There are also requirements for reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities. We'll be watching to see what's happening with those, how many are requested, and what types of policies are in place to respond in terms of reasonable modifications. And certainly, we're doing our analysis and talking to stakeholders on the ground because we are interested in what's happening with the formal evaluations that will take place, but those and we'll want to see what happens and what the assessment is of the impact on people with disabilities, but those evaluations often take a long time. So it is important to see what's going on the ground prior to the formal evaluations being done. So I'm just going to end there. We have a lot of data. We have some state-by-state data on our website related to work. We have a number of reports. We have the waiver tracker. So those are just some of the resources, and I just want to make sure we leave enough time if anyone has any questions that I can try to answer.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see. I think you talked about those questions. So again, question and answer. You can go down to the Zoom Q&A, and Robin, I don't know if you can see the Q&A, but right now there's none open that are relevant to your question. So let me ask a question. Typically I'll ask questions until other folks start to chime in. So in terms of I'll go to the last one that came to mind was the reasonable accommodations question. Was that reasonable accommodations in terms of employment or in terms of being able to manage the program requirements, the reporting requirements for people with disability? So it can be very onerous, as you mentioned, to maintain benefits because of the reporting requirements. Is the accommodations discussion around that or around employment itself?
I believe it's applicable to both. I mean, it happens, the way that the waiver is implemented, or the way that these waivers would be implemented, varies by state. The first state, and what we are following the most closely about what's happening with Arkansas, they are uniquely requiring individuals to create this account and go on. The only way they could do that is reporting is online. The state does have these, registered reporters who can help individuals comply with the reporting. But I believe that the accommodations would be applicable to both the reporting as well as to complying with the work requirements.
Yeah, sure. I have friends whose daughter is an adult with a disability. So their daughter, these parents are 2 PhD economists, and they can never, they have so much difficulty supporting their daughter and filing all the paperwork. And, if you ever go over in terms of earnings in a given month, it can be deadly in terms of the paperwork that you have to file to kind of handle that situation. No questions yet. So another question I have, and Denise, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, or any of the other panelists or UNH and Kessler folks. So another question I have is about the Arkansas. Arkansas, you said there's kind of 3 months of experience with it. Some similar to TANF and the change to TANF and the earned income tax credit back in welfare reform, there was a real push to have people go on to SSI, right? Are you seeing any discussions, or is there any evidence from Arkansas that the number of SSI applications have gone up?
I think it probably is early for that type of experience, and to get a handle on that. I mean, the state already does have a process by which they determine individuals who are medically frail, and they are excluded from participation in, in the private option or the premium assistance in the QHP program. So the state has a process to identify some individuals who are medically frail, and the state is doing a data batch and will automatically, exempt those individuals from the requirements. But the question is, how many other individuals might have a disability, might have a reason that they cannot meet the work or reporting requirements that are not captured in that initial medical frailty determination.
Yeah, for sure. It might be, so I'm flipping through your charts. I don't know if you can see me playing around with the charts. So I'm looking at the state charts, at the 8 pending states. And then of course, so New Hampshire's, I'm sitting in New Hampshire right now. Can you tell me a little bit about oh, actually I have another question. So is NA not applicable or not available for the 39 states?
Oh, right. It's not applicable in terms of states that have submitted waivers to CMS. But again, there are discussions going on. Certainly Oklahoma, South Carolina, Missouri, Michigan had a debate, Minnesota, there was state legislative debate. So the issue is certainly under discussion in state legislatures, and a number of other states might be thinking about developing these type of waivers, but they just haven't been submitted.
Yeah. What have the states, has it uniformly been similar wages, or I'm sorry, not wages, hours? Do they have any what is the hours requirement on work? Do you know?
Yeah, we do have on our waiver tracker where show the population as well as the hours, and there is one state. Most of them are requirements for 80 hours per month. There's one state that is 100, and it might be New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And this is Denise. In the same way, Robin, is there a difference in how they are defining? Because I know most of these say able-bodied. That's what they're. And when you read the press reports about all of this, what you see is, it only covers able-bodied people. And so, and I think that's one of the reasons the disability community has not tuned into this in an intense way yet. Are they defining able-bodied differently by state? How is that?
I mean, just on the previous question, it is New Hampshire that has the hours required are 100 hours per month. So that's higher than many of the other states that are either 80 hours a month or 20 hours a week. And it is right. This is the language is that, this, particularly with the expansion, even though there are many non-expansion states that are pursuing similar policies, There were many, quote, able-bodied individuals who became eligible for coverage. So they should be working, and all the states have a list of exemptions, and how they're a long list of exemptions. So they say if you're working, you should be fine, or if you are not able-bodied, you should be fine. I think that there are questions about these exemptions. So even if you are technically exempt, how do you apply for that exemption, and how is that process? How can individuals navigate that process, and how often do they need to report? So there's a lot of issues there. And again, even if you are technically exempt, you still have to potentially do that reporting. So you still could be subject to coverage loss if you can't navigate that process. So it is not really that you're not affected, because you still, even if you have an exemption, would need to do that reporting to show that you're meeting that exemption.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, is depending on what state you're from, that is going to be defined differently. And if this is something you're looking into, you want to go, it's a very state specific, and you're going to need to check with your Medicaid bureau, et cetera, et cetera. All the way around, it makes for in some ways it's a difficult national conversation to have, because they differ by state from the policy point of view.
So there's
right,
another.
They differ, but I think the issues are similar, that no matter what the process is, when you look at the literature, having a process and having to do additional documentation, generally results in problems obtaining or maintaining coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. If I was not clear on that, absolutely. It is a problem no matter where it exists. Yeah, thank you. And that's, I think, exactly what your slides are showing.
So we have a question coming in from folks online. So do states have to specify a certain reason or exemption for the waiver? If so, are states providing similar reasons for requesting a waiver? So what's the rationale? What are they talking about when they try to implement these waivers?
Yeah, so one of the rationales, and this was in the guidance put forth by CMS, is that work is positively associated with health, and work relates to independence. We have another literature review that we just put out that looks at that relationship between work and health. And again, that was part of what the ruling was in Kentucky, that really the purpose of the Medicaid program is to provide affordable medical coverage, and to the extent that the projections show that some of these provisions would impact that coverage. That was one of the issues cited in the court case in Kentucky for invalidating the waiver. So there are those arguments included in the administration's guidance to states in promoting these objectives, and I think that is part of the crux of what's going on in terms of the litigation. And again, we have a broader, I'm sure I could send that around, a broader literature review that more carefully looks at that relationship between work and health. And it, pretty clearly shows from looking at a large body of research that there's limited evidence on the effect of employment on health. But all of those studies are captured in that report.
Sounds good. We'll make that available to folks, and also your contact information is at the end. We're running quickly out of time, but just to plug your figure 33 that I have up on the screen now. It would be interesting to see what disability types are in the 57% of that 30%. And you could potentially use the self-care disability question and the independent living difficulty questions as kind of severity markers. And so it would be interesting to see those groups. My guess is that they're probably people who are a little bit towards, nearing retirement age. So in any event, thank you, Robin, for your great presentation. I really love all the statistics. Oops, I've been playing around a little bit with the PowerPoint, and I always get in trouble. So anyway, thank you, Robin, and thank you, everybody. It's now 1 o'clock. It's time to go. So thanks a lot. Bye-bye. I'm doing it wrong again. I'm fired.
Hello, and welcome everybody to the National Trends and
Welcome. I'm trying to get to the last slide. Oh, this is terrible. Bad.